I'm an anthropologist, but I didn't start out that way. I started out as a scientist in quantum chemistry and in mathematics. And it was only by observing people interacting in the laboratory that I came to the realization that there must be some underlying science to how people interact and work with each other. And so in order to follow that instinct, I got a degree, a master's degree in mathematical modeling and anthropology, and then followed it up with a PhD from Harvard in anthropology and furthermore in mathematical modeling. And that's what I've been applying ever since as a professional, right? I developed my techniques as a result of following up on my instinct that people are interacting in repeatable, recurring patterns. But in order to be able to prove it, I had to gather data, and I also had to develop the mathematics and the computerization, the computer techniques, in order to monitor the connections between people. And this was in the early days before social media. So there were no techniques at the time. So I'm one of the first pioneers in this field. The reason why this work is important, well, there are several reasons. The first is that when people complain that they don't get recognized for the work that they do, they're telling the truth, because a lot of the work that they do is embedded in these human networks, and organizations do not routinely measure these networks, nor do they feed them into performance metrics where people could be rewarded. So when people work, they work according to the formal hierarchy, but they also work according to their informal networks. And my question to all CEOs and managers is, why wouldn't you measure both? Originally, I was a quantum chemist, and I was conducting research in a laboratory while pursuing a graduate degree. In the laboratory, my office was on the mezzanine, and I was overlooking 200 chemists and physicists in that laboratory. And that's when I saw that they were interacting in patterns, repeatable patterns. So it was a huge insight. It was an epiphany at the moment. But I had to be sure, so I kept staring, I kept looking day after day, and I saw these patterns. So I went to the chairman of my department to give him the disappointing news that I felt that I needed to follow this instinct, and you can't really look at human interaction patterns in quantum chemistry, but you can in the Department of Anthropology in the very same school. So I I matriculated all my coursework over to the Department of Anthropology, where at the time, a very famous mathematician named Frank Harari, who's called the father of graph theory, was working with another anthropologist tracking out the ancient trade networks of people throughout history, basically developing the mathematical techniques for this. So I landed in the honeypot because this is exactly what I wanted to know. But what I wanted to know was not if it occurred in the past, but that if it was a scientific pattern, which would mean it was reproducible, occurring both in the past as well as in the present. It was there at Harvard where I met another very famous mathematician by the name of Marvin Zelen, and he and I published a paper together where we discussed these techniques, and we did a big review paper. At the time, I had no idea that this would be considered a seminal paper in the field. We were just trying to get to the bottom of things and try to understand these patterns. When I first started, there was no field for where to put this insight, these ideas. There were some mathematics that you had some of these ideas in the sciences, but really there was no field looking at the human sciences. So it was a challenge to persuade people of the value of these ideas. And so I had to architect or tell a narrative, a story that would persuade people about why it is so important to measure these networks and that these networks occur in every human culture. In order to do that, I had to collect a lot of data to support my insight and ideas. And that's what took me decades to do, but in the end, persuaded people that yes, these networks are real, they have always been there, and we should be measuring them.